Welcome back. It has been a really historic 12 months, no matter how you look at it. We saw the Arab Spring earlier this year. We saw rioting sweeping across the Middle East, although the overriding reason was certainly oppression. But there was underlying a deep-seated feeling that the have and have-nots or the economic inequality had gotten to a boiling point. And again, you had youth, again, that was the driving force, albeit this time with social media. No coincidence that the uprisings happened in some of the most economically unequal countries on the planet. Let's not forget what kicked off the uprising: a Tunisian vegetable vendor's livelihood challenged when a police person confiscated his unlicensed vegetable cart and its goods. In protest, lit himself on fire, igniting, many say, passions throughout the rest of the Arab world. Now, that vegetable vendor, the breadwinner for his family, despondent, feeling little economic opportunity elsewhere, and he didn't have a choice. Now, if you could take that metaphor and stretch it out, it's a feeling that resonated certainly with other Arab nations, primarily Arab youth, who obviously sit in oftentimes cafes, can't find jobs, staggering unemployment rates, and then we saw the unimaginable. We saw similar riots in countries a little bit more like ours. Now, granted, the rationale behind was different and the spark different as well. In London, what was a peaceful vigil following a police shooting quickly descended into an all-out riot, with British youth venting anger towards anybody in both the uniform and even the wealthy.
What you have is deep-seated alienation amongst young people, amongst generations of family who haven't had work, high levels of poverty, and that sense of animals being caged in this dense area leads to a boiling up of tensions and an outshowing and an outburst of what we saw the other night.
Tensions in these communities have been aggravated by the onset of the Cameron government's cuts in social programs.
Then you saw a different scene in Israel, but more than 250,000 people, 300,000 by some estimates, took to the streets this weekend, primarily in Tel Aviv, to protest rising rent, housing prices, unaffordable cost of living, especially for those that were in the younger age groups. A tent city has sprung up as well.
It's impossible. We work so hard and we cannot afford a quiet life. You know, we always have to struggle.
Okay, and guys, we want to bring the panel back in here. We're joined by Dominic Carter, as well as Andrew Whitman, and of course Ron, who we spoke to last segment. And again, different reasons. The thing in London, I don't want in any way conflate a bunch of thugs looking with opportunism to both loot and just burn here. But I was struck listening to NPR this morning, the common sound bites from all of them to say, hey, you know what? The conservative government here, they cut everything away from us. We're going to show them, we're going to show those, the rich people here, enough is enough. And then, in a nonviolent scene like we played out there in Tel Aviv, we're not talking about Mogadishu. We're talking about London and Tel Aviv. And we have seen in every single numeric, every metric that comes up, the gap between have and have-nots in every Western industrialized world getting bigger and bigger, concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, vanishing middle class. You and I were talking about Ron before. Now, I'm not saying we're gonna, and let's hope it doesn't happen here, but there is, Dominic, don't you think, a palpable sense of frustration and even anger that's coming from, I mean, you look at the unemployment rate of minorities in this country, it boggles the mind. A lot of people feel they don't have a chance at the American dream anymore, and they got a lot less to lose by doing some crazy stuff.
Richard, that's definitely the case. To look at the situation, first of all, that Netanyahu was facing in Israel, it is remarkable. As you said, some 300,000 people. We're not talking about professional protesters, you know, that are busting. We're talking about middle-class people that are upset and angry over housing and traditional issues that middle-class families have to deal with. So now let's bring it back here to the United States. The climate of what's occurring in London, I venture to say, is already here in America. Look at what's happening tonight in Wisconsin, the recall vote. Now, there's no violence there, but there's an actual recall vote against, I believe, 6 members of the legislature there, because some people in Wisconsin have had enough. They have spent, what, some $30 million. $30 million raised for those contests tonight as we speak.
I could twist that into, hey, this is politics, this is unions flexing muscle here. But what I'm trying to get at is,
but it's the voice of the people.
Remember what happened, Watts and Cicero?
Yes.
Sure, there was a black-white thing going on. We had a racial underlying anger that was there. But at the end, for me, if people don't got a lot to lose, they've got a lot less reason to not only mind their P's and Q's, but also a lot less fear of the downside to this. And that's where I just have a question. When does the number, if it's 10% unemployment, that's one thing. But what if the unemployment level gets to 40, 50% for those of the younger demographic in the urban areas of this country? Are we asking for trouble?
We're asking for it now. It's here now. And fortunately, through the great work of the police agencies across this country, we haven't seen the violence that's occurring in London. But just look at what occurred. Pull the video over the last couple of days in Philadelphia. We're on in Philadelphia right now. You had kids the same age as these young people in London.
Mobs, yeah.
That's right, flash mobs. Anybody that they could attack. And you know, I'm not a bleeding heart liberal, but there are those that say that you cut, and now we're dealing with the results of that. Look at what happened on the bus in Philadelphia, where two women got into an argument over the way one mother was taking care of her child. She calls her boyfriend. He comes back. This is all on video. I'm not making this up. And sprays the bus with a rifle.
Are these isolated incidents?
You know, hooligans will be hooligans, whether it's in Philadelphia or London. I think Dominic hit on something in the beginning of what he said, talking about middle-class young people in London, middle-class people in Tel Aviv. And the point that I would make is that I don't think they really are middle-class anymore. I think the economic pressures and the stridation in terms of what the earnings are and where the wealth distribution is has pushed a lot of people who had been in the middle class, who consider themselves middle class, outside of the middle class, outside of the ability for goods and a stable life that the middle class had come to expect. I think the only reason why we haven't seen the kind of energy in the streets that we've seen in other places here is because the quality of life remains higher in the United States. Even people at the same income levels or the same stuff or lack of stuff, you generally have a little bit more here.
My whole question is, you used to be able, if you finished high school or didn't, you could get a job at the factory. You could get a trade. You could do this. Where's that? I haven't seen any inclination by anybody or any suggestion that these manufacturing jobs are coming back here. And yet we see staggering dropout rates. We see, fill in the blank. You know where I'm going with this.
The United States now ranks 23 out of the 26 industrialized nations in education. Okay? If you talk to the CEO of CareerBuilders.com, the largest site, largest website for employment, said the best paying jobs stay on the website longest because they can't find qualified people. That's just one issue. So that's the middle class that went to school, but after they're out of work, which we have the largest amount of chronic unemployed in the history of the country, including the Great Depression, after they're out 6 months or a year, they're not qualified because the technology is moving on. If you talk to major corporations, think it's Dow Chemical, their R&D is now done in China. This is not going to change all that quick. As I said to you, from an economics point of view, Bernanke said today we're going to keep interest rates low. Well, gosh, that means your savings accounts aren't going to earn you anything. That's going to put more stress on the budget, okay, when you're not earning. Yeah. So everything I see is telling you be aware that it's going to be less, that the standard of living that was created probably for the generation before us was about as good as it was going to get. And now you got to make it on your own. You got to figure on your own. You got to work harder. You're not entitled to anything anymore. The governments have to cut. Those cuts are going to be job cuts. Those cuts are going to be...
And what we've seen to this point is just an hors d'oeuvre of the cuts that have to come.
That's right.
I mean, the $1.5 trillion isn't real tangible cuts. They're cutting savings from wars, et cetera.
Those are starting 2017. They're not even real.
And the really frustrating part for these young people is it doesn't look like there's anything that's going to change this matrix for them. There's no promise of a better tomorrow. There's no, even if you do work hard, even if you don't take anything for granted, there are still a lot of doors that are being closed on people. Ask anybody who's been out of work 6 to 9 months. months. I mean, there are a lot of qualified people out there that can't even get their foot in the door right now. So, you know, when those opportunities close, when those doors close, people get frustrated, people get angry, and some people take action.
It did strike me when I was looking at London, and of course but listening to the sound bites from the people that said, hey, we got to send a message or whatever. And I know some of them were looking for free TV, so I'm not trying to conflate all of them. But then you hear the scene in Tel Aviv, which domestically is probably more of a unified country than anything, given all the problems they have on every border, that for them to do this from the progressive side and the conservative side to say it's getting impossible to live here anymore. I just said, Tel Aviv, London, that's a lot different than what we were talking about at the beginning of the year. So I got the rap side on this, and you know how that works, Dominic. I got to go to a break.